Ladies and gentlemen, breaking news shaking the entire Middle East tonight. Yemen has reportedly launched over 1,000 Chinese-made missiles, and the devastation left behind in Israel is being described as total, leaving nothing but dust and unanswered questions. Was this a one-time strike or the beginning of a war that could redraw the map of the region forever? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see this conflict and the future that now hangs in the balance. A single spark has sent shockwaves rippling across the globe. What began as a single, almost unbelievable report has now unfolded into one of the most dramatic developments in recent memory. Viewers around the world are asking the same question. How did this begin? And what could it mean for all of us watching from a distance? It started suddenly without warning, as reports poured in from multiple sources confirming that something extraordinary had happened in the Middle East, the kind of event that changes not just the course of conflict but the entire conversation of international power. Witnesses on the ground described a moment of eerie calm, broken by the unmistakable roar of missile launches cutting through the night sky. Within minutes, social media feeds were flooded with shaky videos, cries of fear, and images that seemed almost too unreal to be true. People who only hours before were carrying on with ordinary routines suddenly found themselves staring at fire in the distance, unsure whether it marked the end of their homes or the beginning of something far greater. For many, this moment is not just about the missiles themselves, but about the deeper message they carry. Experts point to the growing partnerships and shadow alliances that have been forming quietly in recent years, far from the cameras and microphones, while governments issue statements filled with caution and condemnation. The real story may lie in how this single act reveals a shifting balance of power. No longer is the battlefield defined only by local disputes. It is now a stage on which global players test their influence and resilience. And when one nation draws upon weapons crafted far beyond its own borders, the ripple effect is impossible to ignore. The shock has not been limited to political leaders. Ordinary families caught in the middle are the first to feel the terror of uncertainty. Parents clutching their children, unsure where to find shelter. Shopkeepers shutting their doors, wondering if they will ever reopen. Students whose schools have become silent reminders of a world that changed overnight. These human stories add weight to the headlines, reminding us that every statistic represents real lives interrupted. Around the world, leaders are holding emergency meetings. In Washington, London, Beijing, and Moscow, discussions are unfolding late into the night. Some call for restraint, fearing escalation. Others whisper of retaliation, determined not to appear weak in the face of a bold strike. Markets have already reacted with turbulence, investors pulling back as the global economy braces for uncertainty. Analysts warn that what we are seeing now may only be the opening chapter of a far longer and more dangerous narrative. But perhaps the most unsettling element of all is the silence that follows such an explosion of force. For a brief moment after the roar has faded and the dust has settled, the world seems to hold its breath. In that pause, people everywhere are left with the same chilling realization: the spark has already been lit, and no one can fully predict where the flames will spread. As the story continues to develop, one truth becomes clear. This is not just about one launch, one strike, or one region. It is about the fragility of peace in a world where rivalries are sharpening and where one decision in the dead of night can alter the course of history. A weapon no one saw coming has entered the battlefield, and it is already rewriting the story of power, fear, and survival in ways few could have imagined. The first reports were met with disbelief, dismissed as rumors or exaggerations. until confirmation began to pour in from officials, eyewitnesses, and independent sources. Something new has been unleashed, something that was hidden in plain sight until the very moment it struck. And now the world is left grappling with the chilling realization that the rules of the game have changed overnight. For years, military analysts and intelligence agencies have speculated about secret developments, prototypes, and technologies being tested in silence. But speculation is one thing and reality is another. This weapon was not paraded in public, it was not announced with fanfare, and it was certainly not expected to appear in this conflict. Instead, it emerged from the shadows, leaving devastation in its path and unanswered questions in its wake. Those who witnessed it firsthand described a terrifying silence just before impact, followed by a level of destruction that felt entirely unfamiliar. Many said it was unlike anything they had ever seen, with speed, precision, and force that defied expectations. What makes this development so alarming is not just the physical damage, but the mystery surrounding it. Experts are already debating its origin, with some pointing to advanced foreign engineering, while others suggest it may be an evolution of existing systems secretly upgraded for a moment just like this. Governments are cautious with their statements, choosing their words carefully, but behind the scenes, urgency is building. The sudden appearance of such a weapon raises one unavoidable question. If it was hidden until now, what else might be waiting in the shadows, prepared to strike when the world least expects it on tick? He ground, the impact is deeply personal. Families who once believed they understood the risks of conflict now face an entirely new level of fear. A mother who rushed her children into a shelter described the sound as otherworldly, saying she could feel the shockwave in her chest long before she knew what had happened. A young man recording on his phone captured the sky lighting up with a flash that sent entire neighborhoods into chaos. These stories paint a vivid picture of what it means when a new, unknown weapon suddenly enters the fight, leaving ordinary people to cope with extraordinary danger. Globally, leaders are scrambling to understand the implications. If one nation or group possesses such technology, does it mean others will follow? Does it spark a race to develop weapons even more destructive, hidden until the perfect moment to reveal them? Or does it force the international community to step back and reconsider how fragile peace really is? Already, markets are trembling, alliances are being tested, and conversations in war rooms around the world are taking on a new urgency. The balance of power, so often assumed to be stable, now looks like it could shift with alarming speed. What unsettles many is the unpredictability of it all. Wars are fought on known terms with strategies, numbers, and technologies that can be studied and countered. But when a weapon emerges that no one saw coming, the sense of control evaporates. Suddenly, the familiar playbook is useless, and the outcome depends on who can adapt fastest in the face of the unknown. For nations, that means adjusting policies and defenses. For ordinary people, it means living with the haunting thought that tomorrow could bring another strike of something they cannot prepare for. Tonight, the world has been reminded that the most dangerous weapon is often the one that hides in silence, waiting for its moment. And as this story develops, one thing is certain: the age of surprises is far from over. The first strike has landed, and with it came a silence so heavy that the world seemed to stop breathing. In the moments before impact, there was no warning, no siren, no clue of what was about to unfold. Witnesses described an eerie stillness, as if time itself had slowed down, holding everything in place before unleashing a force that would shatter the calm. And then, in a sudden flash, the silence gave way to thunder. The kind of thunder that doesn't roll in from the sky but erupts from the ground, leaving behind fire, fear, and the unmistakable feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. This was not just another attack in an already volatile region. This was the opening move in what many now fear could spiral into something far larger. Military experts call it the first strike, the spark that signals the beginning of a new chapter of conflict. For those on the ground, however, it was far more personal. It was the sound of windows shattering, the sight of children clinging to their parents, the desperate scramble to find shelter in basements, tunnels, and makeshift bunkers. For them, the strike wasn't just a geopolitical maneuver, it was a terrifying reminder of how quickly life can be torn apart. The silence before the storm is something many survivors describe with a chilling clarity. They spoke of the way the air seemed to grow heavier, the way the birds stopped singing, and the way conversations suddenly ended as people turned their eyes to the horizon, sensing something was wrong. And then came the blast. One man recalled how the ground shook beneath his feet before he even understood what had happened. A mother said she could still hear her child's scream echoing in her ears hours later. These human moments cut through the headlines and remind us that behind every military move, there are real lives caught in the middle. Analysts now warn that this first strike could set off a dangerous chain reaction. History teaches us that conflicts rarely end with one blow. Instead, they escalate, pulling more players into the fight and raising the stakes with every passing day. Already, leaders across the globe are issuing urgent statements, some calling for calm, others preparing for retaliation. The question on everyone's mind is whether this was a single warning shot or the opening move in a much wider and more devastating storm. Markets have responded with immediate volatility. Oil prices spiked within hours, and investors are pulling back, fearing that the ripple effects could stretch far beyond the battlefield. At the same time, humanitarian organizations are preparing for what could become a mass displacement of people if the violence escalates. Refugee camps near the borders are bracing for an influx, while hospitals already overwhelmed with ordinary patients are struggling to prepare for casualties they know will come. What makes this moment particularly unsettling is the uncertainty. No one knows what comes next. Was this strike meant to intimidate, to test defenses, or to mark the beginning of a long and brutal campaign? The silence before the storm may be over, but the storm itself is still gathering, its full strength yet to be revealed. And as the world watches, the tension grows heavier, with each nation calculating its next step and each citizen hoping for the best while fearing the worst. Tonight, one fact remains clear. The first strike has fallen, the silence has been broken, and the storm is on its way. How far it spreads and how many lives it will touch is a question no one can yet answer. This is the beginning of a story still being written, and the world will be watching closely as the next chapter unfolds. Stay with us as we continue to track this developing situation. The domino effect has been unleashed, and what began as a single strike is now spiraling into a chain of consequences spreading far beyond the battlefield. In the hours after the initial attack, leaders around the world scrambled to respond. Alliances were tested, and entire economies began to shake. It was as if one move toppled the first piece, and suddenly the rest began falling in quick succession, each one carrying heavier weight than the last. The strike itself was dramatic enough, but the aftermath is proving to be even more dangerous. At first, many thought it might end quickly, that the attack would be contained, and that cooler heads would step in to prevent further escalation. But that was not the case. Retaliation came faster than expected, and with it, a surge of fear across the region. Skirmishes that once seemed localized are now drawing in new players, each one determined not to appear weak, each one calculating its next move with precision and defiance. Analysts describe it as a chain reaction, a series of events that no longer obeys the limits of control. One decision feeds another, one strike demands a response, and soon the situation grows larger than anyone anticipated. For ordinary people living through it, the domino effect feels immediate and crushing. Families who had only just begun to recover from earlier rounds of violence now find themselves packing bags once again, heading toward crowded shelters and border crossings. Business owners shut down their shops, uncertain whether they will ever open them again. Schools are empty, streets are quiet, and the rhythm of daily life has been shattered. One father described it as watching his children grow up in a world where tomorrow feels like a gamble. For millions, the political calculations of leaders are not distant. They are life-altering realities played out in real time. Globally, the ripple effects are accelerating. Oil prices have surged to levels not seen in years. Shipping routes are being rerouted, and markets are in turmoil as investors grapple with a sudden rise in risk. Diplomats who only days ago were speaking in measured tones are now issuing warnings with sharp urgency. Emergency meetings are being called in capitals across the world, with some nations quietly preparing for the possibility that they too could be drawn into the widening circle of conflict. What once seemed like a regional flashpoint is now a global crisis in the making. The domino effect is not only military and economic, it is psychological. Populations thousands of miles away are watching news feeds with growing unease, wondering how secure their own lives truly are in an interconnected world where one strike in one region can send shock waves through every corner of the globe. Social media has amplified the tension, spreading images of destruction and fear faster than official statements can catch up. The narrative is no longer controlled by governments alone. It is shaped by the voices of those living through the chaos and broadcast instantly to the rest of us. And still, the question remains, where does it stop? When dominoes begin to fall, they rarely stop at the second or third piece. They keep going, each one carrying momentum into the next until the entire line collapses. Will diplomacy find a way to halt the collapse before it is too late? Or are we already watching the inevitable unfold, powerless to change the course? That uncertainty is what makes this moment so dangerous, and why so many are holding their breath as events continue to accelerate. Tonight, the domino effect has been unleashed, and the world stands at a crossroads. Whether the chain reaction ends here or spreads into something far more destructive will depend on choices made in the coming days, as in choices that could shape the course of history. Stay with us as this story continues to unfold. The world holds its breath as tensions reach a point where every second feels like it could decide the future. After days of escalating conflict and a series of shocking developments, tonight is different. There is no movement on the front lines, no fresh explosion to report, but the silence itself is deafening. It is the kind of silence that carries weight, that leaves people across continents staring at their screens, waiting for the next headline to confirm whether the crisis will cool down or erupt into something far worse. On the ground, that silence feels unbearable. Families sheltering in basements describe a strange calm, broken only by the nervous whispers of neighbors or the distant hum of aircraft circling above. Mothers clutch their children tightly, listening for sirens that may or may not come. In crowded cities far from the battlefield, people scroll endlessly through their phones, trying to catch every update, unwilling to sleep in fear they might miss the news that changes everything. That shared anticipation stretches across borders, uniting millions in one universal feeling, dread mixed with hope. Leaders around the world are equally tense. In Washington, London, and Moscow, secure lines buzz with conversations filled with warnings, bargaining, and urgent appeals for restraint. In Beijing, advisors debate how deeply to involve themselves, knowing that any decision could tilt the balance of global power. Inside the United Nations, diplomats walk briskly through hallways, their expressions hard to read, their words chosen with extreme caution. Each one understands the stakes. A single misstep, a single misunderstood message could set off a chain reaction that would leave no nation untouched. Markets, too, are holding their breath. Investors who once thrived on calculated risks are now pulling back, waiting to see whether this fragile moment tips to world peace or chaos. Oil prices remain volatile, currencies swing wildly, and businesses large and small are hesitating to make moves that might lock them into a future they can no longer predict. Economists warn that uncertainty itself is a weapon, draining confidence and paralyzing growth even before a single additional shot is fired. What makes this moment so gripping is that no one truly knows what comes next. In past conflicts, the patterns were clearer. One side strikes, the other responds. Diplomacy scrambles to catch up. But now, the rules seem less certain. The weapons are more advanced, the players more unpredictable, and the consequences far more global. People everywhere are realizing that what happens in one corner of the world no longer stays there. From gas prices at the pump to the stability of international trade routes, the impact could ripple outward into everyday lives faster than most can imagine. Social media has only amplified the suspense. Hashtags trend by the hour, videos circulate at lightning speed, and misinformation spreads alongside genuine reports, blurring the line between what is real and what is rumor. For many, that only adds to the anxiety. One wrong image, one misleading post could inflame passions and push leaders into decisions they cannot undo. And so millions of eyes remain fixed on screens, waiting for clarity, hoping for reassurance, but bracing for the opposite. Tonight, the world is in a rare and fragile position, united not by agreement, but by collective anticipation. From crowded cities to quiet villages, from parliaments to living rooms, people everywhere are waiting, watching, and wondering how close we truly are to the edge. This is not just about politics or power. It is about humanity standing still, suspended between the possibility of peace and the threat of disaster. And so, as the silence stretches on, truth is undeniable. The world holds its breath, and history is waiting to exhale. Stay with us as we continue to follow this unfolding story. The unthinkable future is no longer a distant warning. It is a possibility staring us directly in the face. What began as isolated clashes, what seemed at first like a regional crisis, has now escalated into a moment of global uncertainty, forcing leaders and ordinary people alike to confront questions that many hoped would never need to be asked. The events of the past few days have pulled back the curtain on a world far more fragile than most realized, and the choices made now will shape not only the course of this conflict, but the direction of our collective future. For those closest to the battlefield, the unthinkable is already their daily reality. Families huddle in makeshift shelters, listening to the echo of distant explosions, uncertain if they will live to see the morning. Children who once filled classrooms now spend their days underground, drawing pictures of peace on scraps of paper, while their parents silently wonder how to protect them from a danger that feels unstoppable. In the markets, bread and water have become scarce, and every day is a struggle to survive. These are not just statistics, they are lives unfolding under the shadow of a crisis that refuses to stop spreading. But this moment does not belong only to those in the immediate line of fire. The ripples extend outward, reaching across borders, across oceans, across economies and alliances. In cities thousands of miles away, people are already feeling the weight of rising prices, disrupted trade, and a fear that the headlines they read today could become the reality they live tomorrow. What once felt like someone else's war now feels like a threat pressing against the edges of everyone's future. The unthinkable is no longer far away. It is creeping into dinner table conversations and late-night news cycles around the world. Leaders are grappling with impossible decisions. In emergency sessio and closed-door meetings, they weigh the cost of action against the cost of silence. Some argue that stepping in could prevent catastrophe. Others warn that involvement could trigger an even greater disaster. Allies whisper of betrayal. Adversaries speak of retaliation, and no one can say with certainty what the next move should be. This is the kind of uncertainty that history remembers, the kind that defines generations, the kind that forces nations to show who they really are when the stakes are at their highest. The unthinkable future also carries a lesson about our shared vulnerability. Technology and power have advanced to the point where the choices of a few can alter the destiny of billions. A single strike, a single miscalculation, a single unchecked escalation can ripple outward faster than diplomacy can contain it, and as the world grows more connected, the consequences grow heavier. It is no longer possible to say that conflict is not ours. The truth is, in one way or another, it belongs to us all. For ordinary people, this realization is unsettling. Parents wonder what kind of world their children will inherit. Workers worry if their jobs and savings can withstand another economic shock. Students scroll through their feeds trying to make sense of headlines that read more like movie scripts than reality. And in every corner of the world, a shared unease settles in. The recognition that we are living through a moment that could define the shape of what comes next. Tonight, the future feels unthinkable because it is still unwritten, but it is clear that the decisions made in the coming hours and days will echo for decades to come. The storm has been unleashed, the dominoes have already started to fall, and the world now waits to see how far they will tumble. The question is no longer whether this moment will change history, but how deeply it will carve its mark into the lives of all of us.